We've learned a lot recently about the rise of hate crimes against Asian Americans, but it's also been a reminder that acts of hate against Asian Americans is nothing new. For example, during World War II, the U.S. government forced Japanese Americans to give up their homes and businesses, their farms and land. The government considered them enemies and moved them into concentration camps here in the United States. The grandparents and parents of artist Paul Akira Miyamoto were among those who were imprisoned, and he reflects on their lives as farm laborers before and after life in a U.S. concentration camp in his new exhibition. It's coming to Lake George. What it means to go home. That's our story of the day.
Story of the Day is supported by Kenny Drugs, employee-owned and locally committed since 1903. KennyDrugs.com.
Hey there, I'm Celia Clark. It's Wednesday, April 28th. First up, there are encouraging signs for the North Country's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Across the region, consumer spending appears to have returned to pre-pandemic levels and even surpassed it in some places. Ryan Finnerty reports.
North Country residents are once again going out and spending money. Data from the State Comptroller's Office shows sales tax revenue for all North Country counties in January and February was about the same as those months last year. Early 2020 marked the last data points before COVID-19 forced a massive economic shutdown.
When the pandemic hit, it seemed like we were going to hit maybe a 20 to 30% decrease in sales tax.
North Country leaders like Plattsburgh Mayor Chris Rosenquist were planning for the worst. Sales tax revenue did decline by double-digit margins at the start of the pandemic, but overall, the drop wasn't as severe as expected.
At the end of the day, we hit a 3% decrease in sales tax, so we brought in a little bit more than what we expected to.
And now the recovery appears to be gaining momentum. March tax data shows an increase in local spending even larger than last year's decline. With more and more people getting vaccinated, warmer weather on the way, and millions of cooped-up Americans looking for a summer getaway closer to home, the trend will likely continue for the Adirondack region. And there's another encouraging sign. The Biden administration's American Rescue Plan provided $350 billion to state and local governments to offset revenue lost during the pandemic. Rosenquist says that money will allow cities like Plattsburgh to recover and move forward.
That will help offset a number of revenue items that we did miss last year. That will certainly help with those other initiatives that we're looking at developing too.
Those initiatives will focus on improving Plattsburgh's outdoor spaces like parks and facilities at the city beach on Lake Champlain. Ryan Finnerty, North Country Public Radio.
A new exhibit of work by Hudson Valley artist Paul Akira Miyamoto opens in Lake George next week. Titled Go Home, the exhibit includes ink and oil paintings depicting scenes of life in a Japanese-American internment camp during World War II and immigrant workers toiling in the fields of Central California. His grandparents came to the U.S. from Japan in the early 20th century to work as itinerant farmers, and then were sent to a Japanese-American internment camp in Arizona for 5 years, from 1941 to 1946. He told Todd Moe that the field workers in his artwork, often placed in landscapes drawn from his own memory, portray past family members, but could easily represent present-day immigrant farm workers. He said it was difficult for his parents and grandparents to talk about being forced into an American concentration camp.
My mom and dad were very reluctant until later on in their life. I kind of knew that they were getting on in age, and I didn't have much time to really talk to them. So I tried to press ahead and talk to my mother especially. My mother, I felt, was the sort of the family historian. She knew all the dates. I was sort of really encouraged by my mother to learn about the contemporary history, especially during the war. She would always read the newspaper and clip things out about the latest revelations about the concentration camps and things like that.
The title of the exhibit, Go Home, I have to be honest, Paul. I read that, and those words, just those two words, are so powerful, and I can't even imagine saying those words to another person.
Hurtful ways,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
in a lot of ways, and that seems to be the current trend. But back in the day, it certainly was too. But it also has a second meaning where we are finding our way home, to go home after this circuitous, unfortunate turn of events. They were taken from their home and then placed in concentration camps, and then they had to work their way back, as we did, stopping in Arizona, gathering our resources, figuring out our next step, lining up some sort of support mechanism, which meant jobs for my grandfather and my father, and a place for us to stay. And we found that in a strawberry cooperative in Oxnard, California. And after that, we started packing up and heading out to California back in 1954, 1955. It is powerful words, and I chose it specifically for that meaning because my friends and colleagues would trace our ancestry back. I would ask them questions, they would ask me questions, and we would talk about, yeah, well, I'm third generation in America, and I found out that they were the same way. They had immigrant parents, grandparents who came here and established themselves and started a life in a homestead. So I imagine a lot of even Irish Americans and Italian Americans, German Americans even had the same words spoken to them, and it certainly had just about the same meaning. African Americans as well, which is really more tragic than our story. But what I found was that there's a sort of commonality in those terms that have really strong meaning.
Let's talk a bit about some of the pieces, and they are beautiful. First of all, the colors are amazing. I'm wondering, there's a lot of symbolism in the paintings as well. Interestingly, the figures. I'm assuming you were thinking about your parents and your grandparents as farmers working the land, but the figures are a little faint. Is that intentional, that you wanted to keep that a little vague?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. Even though my intention was to pay tribute and homage to first and second generation.
Right.
In Japanese American terms, we called them Issei, which was the first generation, my grandparents, and Nisei, my parents' generation, the second generation. And myself, I'm Sansei, the third generation. So I meant specifically for that to guide my paintings. But at the same time, I kept thinking about a universal aspect of immigrants working and toiling. Specifically, I started reading about the Syrian refugees, that here these professionals, doctors, lawyers, teachers, were relegated to this path of moving out of their homes and having to flee their country for their own safety. And they would be working in fields, agricultural fields, really hard work, hard physical labor.
Your exhibit, as you explained, you want to try to explain or exhibit this universal immigrant story to America, but at the same time, Paul, there is a great deal of pride in your own heritage.
Yes, especially the farming aspect. Listen, I became an artist because I definitely did not want to be a farmer. Up until when I was in high school, I just, it's a tough life.
Yeah.
It's a lot of hard work and long hours, as any farmer knows out here. But I definitely knew that I did not want to be a farmer, but I appreciated the work because I did it myself. Once you've done that kind of labor, your back kind of feels it all the time, and your legs, and you know exactly how to assume that position. We were out in California actually for a sad occasion when my mother passed away, and I was driving through the fields, as I like to do when I visit my hometown of Oxnard, California, it's amazing that the fields look exactly the way they did when I was a child growing up. And I looked around the fields, and the field workers had that same position. I knew very well, stooped over, bent over, using their back, using their legs and arms to work and harvest the fields. And yet I looked closer, and they were no longer Japanese Americans out there. They were Mexican Americans. And then I knew that, wow, this cycle is gone on and on and on, and it will continue to do so.
That was artist Paul Akira Miyamoto speaking with Todd Moe. Miyamoto's exhibit opens next week at the Lake George Arts Project's Courthouse Gallery. You can always get more regional news on our website, ncpr.org. All the news you find there is possible because of you, our listeners. It's our spring fundraiser. When you make a donation to North Country Public Radio, your contribution helps us to bring you local news from across the North Country every day. Make your contribution now at ncpr.org/give. Music today was from North Country musicians Beth Robinson of Potsdam and Paul Rausvig of Long Lake. I'm Celia Clark, North Country Public Radio.